Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of a Solar Empire 2. So today we're going from the very elegantly designed and very intelligently synergistic Takadaran command fortress to the poorly named, poorly designed, and very incoherent Khevarkov modular battlecruiser for the Tech Primacy faction. This is their command class ship. Now, first of all, Kavarkov, very difficult to pronounce. I do not understand it. And Battlecruiser is very peculiar given that this is the size of like 10 battleships strapped together. Now, generally speaking, a Battlecruiser is supposed to be a more lightly armored, faster, big guns ship that's capable of going very, very fast compared to a battleship. Now, granted, this does get one thing right. It is fast. However, it has all small guns, and it is very, very heavily armored compared to the Cole. So they got one thing right out of the things that they were supposed to in the mission design docs, and I guess that's good enough for tech primacy. Anyway, I actually think that this ship's a lot of fun to use, and I think it's actually pretty powerful, and there's a lot of theory crafting you can get behind it, but it is a virtually incoherent ship. The balance is garbage on this thing overall, and I don't actually think that it's particularly good. I think it's kind of just okay. The obvious comparison for this is the Oblivia. If we were to take a comparison of like all the different ships that are in this new class, Tech Primacy and Advent, we're supposed to get like big brawlers that are capable of dealing a lot of damage. That's what this one is supposed to be. The Oblivia is the Advent version of this with Tech Wrath, or sorry, Advent Wrath. And the Oblivia just does the design doc much better. It is capable of going up and punching things in the face really, really effectively. This thing is also pretty okay at punching things in the face, but it has a lot of compromises at being able to do that. That comes with it being technically more flexible. Turns out that this is like that Bruce Lee quote, where the Khevarkov is that guy that has learned how to master, has done 1,000 different punches once each, whereas the Oblivia is that one guy who's done one punch 1,000 times. So the Oblivia knows how to do like plasma damage, and if you tell it to do something else, it will just punch you in the face with plasma damage, and you'll die. Whereas with the Khevarkov, you can tell it to do anything. It'll do anything you want, but it kind of sucks at all of them. So yeah, this thing, I don't know. I don't like it. Is how I put it. It's a real step back down from the Takadaran command fortress. And as far as its particular role, I think that it has a little. It needs a few things changed to it if it really wants to be good at that.
Time to
So
clear the sector.
let's take a look at the stats here. It's got a durability of 600. It's got 4,150 shield points, 4,510 armor points, and 7,100 hull points. Antimatter pool is 280. It's got 3 squadrons of strikecraft. And its weapons are 8 medium autocannons at 8 damage per second, each with 200 pierce for a total of 64 damage per second, and 8 light autocannons at 6.7 damage per second with 100 pierce for a total of, I don't know, like 53 damage per second or something like that. And that's it. That's what it has for weapons. It's got like a total of 100 and something, about 115 damage per second or something like that. I don't remember. 120 damage per second with all low pierce weapons. That's what its base loadout is. Now, there are some things that we can go into later that'll actually clear up what this is about, but that is appallingly low damage per second numbers. It's actually kind of as bad as the Takadaran. It's actually worse. It's substantially worse, actually. In any event, though, we got a hidden statistic stats of here of like 105 armor strength, which is really, really, really good. And that's got 725 maximum speed, which is also really, really, really good. So this is very fast. It's very heavily armored. It's very durable. It's got no guns. And it's capable of going around and bullying frigates at best. So what exactly is going on here? Well, this is a modular battlecruiser, which means that like half of its stats are hidden away in the ship slot items. Now, I have to state right out of the gate here, the reason I think that this is doing a poor job of what its role is that these item slots are actually fairly dear to a ship. So if I was to talk about like a different class of ship or whatever, like, yeah, the modular advanced missiles are better scaling in that they give you 120 damage right up front there. That's a lot of extra damage compared to a lot of other items that could be added to a lot of the other ships that are out there. But you can actually get more damage total by adding like a single item to its comparison, which is the Oblivia. If the Oblivia has like the plasma agitators, it's also kind of adding near that amount of damage just in terms of plasma. So you're getting 120 damage from this one, but you're starting like with minus 155 armor piercing damage, because like that's kind of how much damage the Oblivia does to capital ships. You do 0 and the Oblivia does 155. So you get this, and now you're doing about 120. The Oblivia gets the Plasma Agitator, and it's doing about 260. So you've gone from having a deficit of 155 to a deficit of like 140. So you're not actually catching up. And then you go ahead and get the like missile turrets, but the other guy gets like the energy amplifier, and you're looking at a situation where it's like, yeah, okay, you're catching up faster now, but like they're still way ahead of you, and you've both just bought one item. Now the nice thing about these is that none of these cost any exotics, so you are able to switch them out freely. You can take them, you can add them in very quickly, and that like does give you those damage spikes. And once you've got access to a couple of these, you do in fact like outscale a naked Oblivia, which is okay, because like it'll take them a little bit longer before they've got the exotics maybe to get those particular weapon upgrades, and they have to research those weapon upgrades. So it's kind of fine that's like that in some ways. So anyway, you've got module slot and you've got a turret slot. You can get one module and one turret set. For the modules, you're looking at the modular launch base. You've got plus 10 maximum squadron slots here, and that one's pretty good. We'll talk a little bit more about why that's so good later. You got the modular advanced missiles, which gives you 2 advanced missiles at 60 damage per second with 600 pierce. This is the exact same as the ones that you can add to the Takadaran. They're also quite good here. And then you got modular railguns with 40 damage per second with 2 of them with 1,000 pierce. This is 80 damage per second with 1,000 pierce. And I tested these. These are not Gauss guns, so they do not gain any of the benefits from those techs or upgrades. However, they are kinetics. Next up, you have the beam turrets, which are one of your first turrets. This gives you 4 rapid-fire beams, 25 damage per second, for a total of 100 with 500 pierce. These are, again, the same as the ones on the Takadaran, except the Takadaran gets them for free. They're actually quite good. The problem is their scaling is quite bad, so maybe you would pick these early on and then pull them off later. The next one is the Gauss turrets. These ones are much worse during the early game. You get 4 Gauss cannons, 15 damage per second, 600 pierce, total of 60 damage per second with 600 pierce. So again, it's not as good as the beams under normal circumstances, although base value is better for dueling other command ships. So if you had to go up against something with 600 toughness, this is the better gun, even out of the gate there. It also has much better scaling than the beams, because it's both a Gauss weapon, so it's able to get the heavy Gauss slugs upgrade, and it's also a kinetic, so it also benefits from the rapid autoloader. So much more of a late game gun. Could still compete with the beam turrets under certain circumstances during the early game, but the beam turrets are much more flexible. So it's up to you what you sort of want as far as that goes. And the last option is the missile turrets. These are just all around very, very strong. 4 heavy missiles, 26.7 damage per second each for some amount of damage over 100. It's like a little bit over. And then 600 pierce on these guys. So the heavy missiles mixed with the advanced missiles can give you a tremendous amount of missile pressure and damage, but again, you run into the potential problem of being countered by enough point defenses, so you have to sort of weigh that risk there. All of the weapons I think are actually quite good, and there's a lot of interesting combinations that you can come up with depending on how you want to do things. But the first thing I sort of wanted to mention again, getting one of these weapons is not much stronger than getting a weapon modification upgrade on a different design of ship. Imagine if they decided to not make this a modular ship, and instead of having to use your item slots, this thing was equipped with 6 Gauss weapons. It had 2 large Gauss cannons on the sides, and it had 4 Gauss turrets. And all of that Gauss weaponry was like designed to deal a lot of anti-command ship / anti-Titan damage, maybe. Well, the thing about that is, if you had that design, you wouldn't have to add in any upgrades, and you could just get the heavy Gauss slugs, and you'd have 1 item slot taken up by the fact that you've done that, and you'd have like a ton of extra damage. As it is, you kind of have to get the railguns and the Gauss turret and then the heavy Gauss slugs, so you've used up half your item slots for that sort of effect there. So I think that what I kind of want to see on this thing is for it to have 7 item slots. Just given the way it's designed, it kind of needs that. Now, if it had just the modules or whatever, like there are other ships that are kind of like that, you can kind of get by with that. Like -1 item slot, you can cope. -2 to be at your baseline functioning is pretty rough. That's pretty rough. So anyway, let's talk about the abilities of this thing. Not going to talk too much more about those items, except for yes, we will, because all of these are actually like, well, not all of these 2 abilities sort of bounce off the items that you select for this ship here. So Tactical Assault works on both your turrets and your modules. It's got a cooldown of 90 seconds, antimatter cost of 40, scaling up to 95, I believe, and a duration of 40 seconds. The cooldown and duration stay constant, so you have a terrible uptime ratio regardless of what you're doing. For the beam weapons, you kind of have the weakest effect there. You have splash damage going from 5% to 30% at maximum level, and the splash damage radius is 750. Now, this isn't terrible, especially during the early game when you're fighting a lot of lighter ships, but it's obviously like kind of it feels almost like a placeholder ability here because you're not getting a module bonus, you're just getting the beam turrets there. It's not even necessarily going to make you punchier at the thing that should be shooting at, because if you're shooting at a capital ship, you might not even catch anything in that radius. So I definitely think that that's the worst of the upgrades by a pretty large margin there. Could be useful against cruiser swarms, but I think that it's not the best even at that sort of situation, broadly speaking. The next one is for your railgun and Gauss weapons. And what this does is it increases your damage against shields by 25%, scaling all the way up to a massive 75% damage increase. The railguns and Gauss weapons also get 25, 50, 70. Well, it actually goes up in different ratios, but it goes from 25 to 75% bonus range, making it so that these guns can fire from tremendous distances at the enemy there. And we'll talk a little bit about a build that sort of uses that later. But basically making it so that your railgun and Gauss weapons are capable of bypassing shields faster is actively increasing their damage per second output by a quite large amount. One of the reasons why that's so good to be able to do bonus shield damage in particular is so many ships in this game, especially capital ships, which is what you want to be focusing on with railguns and Gauss weapons, have that shield burst ability, meaning that they gain their shields back multiple times. By the time you kill a capital ship in sort of one of the earlier game capital ship duels, or a command class duel, they are very likely going to have 2 or 3 shield bursts go off during that time, depending on a lot of other factors. But it's not unheard of for that to happen. And in that case, you have to grind their shields down multiple times. And being able to do that faster just makes it so that you're able to kill that ship way, way more efficiently. So that's actually really, really nice. And the ranged weapon damage, or the increased range, making it so that these guys are able to stay in the back, does help under certain circumstances as well. For missile weapons, it does give you missile retargeting, so you don't need to get the item for these guys, the item that gives you missile retargeting, but you still benefit from the 10% extra damage. However, that's an aura, so you can just slap that onto like an Akan or something like that and have it hovering around, and it'll increase the missile damage of these guys. I don't know if you can put that on an Akan, actually. Maybe put it on a Dunov. But regardless, like this gives you 15% missile weapon reload speed, so you fire your missiles way faster, and it scales up to 50%, which is a very sizable bonus for firing those missiles off faster. And this applies to both your turrets and to your modules. So this is a really, really powerful sort of a bonus if you're going for that missile style build there. Overall, it's the biggest damage boost out of all of the possible upgrades, because it applies to like shields, it applies to armor, and it applies to hull. And it applies on very high damage weapons. So this is very, very strong for that purpose there. Your next ability is Modular Overdrive. This has a cooldown of 90 seconds, scaling down to 65, and the antimatter cost goes from 75 to 135, if I recall correctly. This ship has a lot of numbers, and I don't like that fact, but it does. The modular railguns, and note, this only applies to the modular upgrades. It does not apply to your turrets, so the launch bays, advanced missiles, and railguns. For the modular railguns, it makes it so that the target hit there has their speed reduced by 25%, scaling up to 50. Same for their maximum turn speed, and it removes 25 antimatter per hit, scaling up to 50 as well. So the target that you hit here becomes much slower, it becomes much worse at turning, and it slowly gets their antimatter removed. It's not enough antimatter removal on enough guns with a fast enough fire rate to really screw someone over for antimatter, but it's enough to really chip away at it over time. And it can help suppress a more mana-hungry ship that's out there. However, I think that the way that you ultimately use the railgun thing is to stop an enemy ship from repositioning, and especially preventing them from getting out of a situation alive. Reducing their speed and their turn rate by that much makes it so that you can easily kill a ship before it's capable of fleeing from the sector. The next one is the Modular Advanced Missile Equipment. This one gives you missile volleys, so it fires off multiple waves of missiles, exactly like the Mars's Ultimate. It hits a maximum of 16 targets at base and scales up to 32 at maximum. And that's all that scales up. You still fire the same number of missile volleys. You still do 200 damage per missile, and there's still 600 pierce. It's just that you fire at more targets, which does actually increase the effective damage of this by quite a bit. This is actually a fairly powerful ability. It's 1,000 damage per cast on a 90-second cooldown, hitting quite a large number of targets. So this is actually pretty good for clearing out large numbers as well. Arguably, this is one of the reasons why I think the beam is so bad, because like the beam splash I think is actually worse than just using the modular advanced missiles to spray out a bunch of missiles in waves and kill a bunch of targets that way. I think that that's actually stronger for dealing with multiple targets. So given sort of the choice between the two, that's kind of what I would pick. The 90-second cooldown, though, at level 1 does make it a little bit harder to get that effect against like a lot of ships, because you're not going to one-shot anything. But you can actually use this against like ships with all 3 of them, and at that point in time, you're like killing sort of lighter, maybe really really light cruisers, but any of the frigates get like one shot by that, because it's 3,000 damage there. So I think that that's a very powerful ability. I think it's quite strong. The radius of it's 8,000. I believe it's actually just random ships that are around you, and I'm not 100% sure how they're targeted, but it does spray out your missiles in a pretty good arc there. Next one is the modular launch bays. This one has a duration of 60 seconds, so it's not a burst effect like the other ones or an on-hit effect like the other ones. Instead, your strike craft for 60 seconds are buffed. Your strike craft take 25% less damage, scaling up to 50% at maximum level. So having the damage that all your strike craft takes is good, but it's not enough for the thing to be viable against the Anacral Wanderer. So just keep that in mind. The pulse is still going to screw you over. Strikecraft weapon damage increases by 50%, scaling up to 100%, so effectively capable of doubling your damage at maximum level. This is actually a really, really powerful ability. The uptime matches the cooldown once you get to higher levels, or it comes close, so you're missing 5 seconds. But this is a fairly powerful ability if you're going for that Strikecraft option, and we'll talk about that build later. Now, if you don't have any modules equipped at all, this one has a shield recharge, basically, which is not worth it. You do want to have a module equipped for this, generally speaking. But if you don't have anything equipped there, you can get a shield restore of 40 per second up to 90 per second at maximum level for a duration of 25 seconds, which is not bad. It's just that like there's definitely better things that are out there, and the shield restore rate is kind of like, if you compare that to the Solarcan Tyrant, like the shield restore on this with the 25 second compared to the passive based on stacks that the Solarcan Tyrant is capable of getting, this clearly falls behind in that. And you're paying like 135 antimatter to just cast the damn thing. So obviously this is way worse than that. I think that's pretty weak. You definitely want a module on this ship. Anyway, those are like all the things that Modular Overdrive does. It's a lot of text. Next one is Nav Computer, and this is again a lot of text despite everything. Cooldown on this one is 2 minutes, and antimatter cost is 50. I believe it scales up to 75 at maximum level. But the most important part of this is actually the passive aura, which is active even if you haven't spent anything. Radius of 5,000, maximum speed of plus 5% to everyone in that radius, maximum turn speed plus 5%, and phase jump charge time reduced by 25% for everyone in that radius. This one scales up to 30%, 30%, and 50%, I believe. So it's a pretty powerful buff for getting your fleet around much faster and going from system to system as it is. I think that this is actually a pretty decent boost. Having at least one of these guys capable of keeping your fleet at those higher speeds is really, really nice there. The main problem is that 5,000 radius is actually quite a small circle. And because of that, it's actually kind of hard to keep your entire fleet when it's on transit in that clump together, making it harder to coordinate your jumps so that everything's moving the way that you want it to. So when activated, this gives you 25 seconds at all levels of, 25 seconds increasing to 50 seconds at maximum level of additional maximum speed and turn speed for the Khevarkov itself, 25% and scaling up to 50. So this one does stack with the radius aura, so you do actually scale up in speed as you go up in levels, but the duration for the actual active effect just increases. It doesn't actually get faster when it's activated by more than that. So this is something that you can use to like escape with this thing, or if you wanted to run something down, you could also do that. But generally speaking, I think that this is mostly going to be used for fairly evasive type things here. So The last ability is its most powerful and its weakest and its weirdest. Ion Pulse Wave has a cooldown of 3 minutes, 110 antimatter cost, scaling up to, I believe, 165 or something like that. I'm going to check here because this, again, ship has too many numbers. Yeah, up to 165. You have to sort of wait 2 seconds for it to activate, after which, in a 7,500 radius, it disables all enemy targets for 5 seconds. It also destroys all missiles in that radius. Not Strikecraft, it just destroys missiles. So a 5 second stun once every 3 minutes on 3 of your ships is kind of fine. Like, it's okay. You're not going to get too much done in 5 seconds or even 15 seconds, but you can actually have that mean a little bit. Getting it to time it so that it's exactly at the right moment where your opponent still hasn't got buffs on and is just about to, and the pulse wave hits before they can, giving you a 5 second window to like really lay into some enemies. Like, that could potentially happen, but it's very difficult to time. I think that, like, when you got this at level 1, it's just not really good enough to really write home about, but it's kind of okay as just like an interrupt for the enemy or something like that. You can use Ion Pulses like in rotation to stop your opponent from like phase jumping out or something like that. It could situationally be kind of okay. You can use it to interrupt channels. You can do a couple different things with it. But what really is interesting is when you hit level 2, the active duration, which means that you sort of have to like wait a little while there, and it disables enemy ships for 15 seconds at that point in time. And what's important about that is if you're capable of disabling ships for 15 seconds with one of these guys, you can have the entire enemy fleet disabled for 45 seconds at that level 10. Now, you're never going to actually get 3 of these guys to level 10 unless something weird is going on in your game. But if you do manage to rush that somehow, and there's probably people who are like theory crafting ways to do that, you're functionally making it so that your entire enemy fleet has a downtime of 45 seconds every 3 minutes, which is absolutely crazy. That's a 25% downtime for their entire fleet. That's kind of ridiculously broken. There's a lot that you can get done in that time span, and it doesn't take too long to get you another set of Ion Pulse Waves. So you can get your opponent completely screwed over with this, meaning that like when you hit that level 10 spike, you're completely unstoppable in some ways there. I think it's actually really broken once you get there. The problem is you'll never get there, realistically speaking. So you're stuck with the level 1 version, and you're not going to get very much utility out of that because it's not quite good enough to get a huge amount out of it. I would again say the best use of this is interrupting things like phase jumps or channels. And for that purpose, like, it's perfectly good at doing that, and those are really good things to be able to do. So it's not bad. It's okay, but it's nothing groundbreaking, whereas like at level 10 it suddenly is groundbreaking. In any event, let's talk a little bit about military research. As far as level ups go, starting level 2 with this thing is pretty good. If you're going for one of them to have like nav computer, it's going to be your secondary ability, so opening up having a level of that, giving your sort of like smaller earlier game fleets a little bit more immediate mobility is quite nice there. And if you are going for a weapons sort of loadout here, having both tactical assault and modular overdrive, depending on your weapon combination, could be quite meaningful. On the other hand, if you're going for certain weapon combinations, it could mean nothing at all, really. So it really does depend on what you've decided to go for. As far as our weapon upgrades, this really does benefit from virtually everything in one way or another. Your kinetics are surprisingly okay, because like I said, you do have over 110 damage per second with your kinetics, and being able to fire those a little bit better does make a difference. This is also where you find the rapid auto-loaders, and those do apply to your Gauss weapons, as well as your railguns, so getting those is quite good for that sort of style. And if you are going for this anyway, then having that like apply to your regular autocannons, nothing wrong with that. That's just increased damage that you're going to be getting anyway. For the Gauss weapon upgrades, they kind of suck. It's unfortunate. It would be nice if these things actually did more, but the ones that you do have apply here, and they're pretty good. The heavy Gauss slugs heavy Gauss slugs blueprint, doubling the damage of those is quite good if you're going that route there. Bringing it up to 120 damage with them is quite nice. But it does only apply to like one weapon. It doesn't apply to the railguns. It'd be nice if those railguns were Gauss weapons. Beams, if you're going for beam, that's obviously important. I think it's the least likely one that you're going to go for, though, because by the time you're sort of like scaling further, you're probably going to drop the beams and go for something else. The missile upgrades are fantastic if you're going for that build, especially things like extended range and armored missiles. Those are very, very powerful upgrades for the ship, especially the armored missiles, making it so that those heavy missiles are capable of surviving into the enemy really, really effectively. Quite nice there. The missile guidance, though, only plus 10% extra damage, and you're probably already getting missile retargeting, so it's a lot less important to get this for this particular ship design. As far as your engineering slots go, I do think that this ship has really good armor, so increasing its armor would be nice, but unfortunately, tech doesn't actually get armor increases. They get them from up here, up to 15%, so that kind of sucks. However, accessing things like reactive armor or the ablative armor really does help with this guy. You don't need the advanced maneuvering as badly as other ships because you've got that maneuverability spike that you can use, and you've also got the passive, so you can kind of get around without that. For this particular ship, I think that you sort of just have to take everything, but none of them are specifically priority. I would sort of say that almost unlocking the items up here are the priority for it. Antimatter is going to be kind of okay for this guy. It does kind of go through quite fast with its abilities and does want them active all the time, so it does need that. I don't know how much you need antimatter engine necessarily, but it is something that I personally pick up for these guys. And shield burst is going to be quite nice for them. It's not as good at the durability game as the Takadaran. The Takadaran is capable of doing so much damage mitigation on every hit against it that it's capable of getting a lot more value out of things like shield burst, where it's getting hit by like an enemy ship for like 5,000 damage or whatever, but it's reduced it down to like 50. And as a result, like their shields are worth a lot more hit points because their shield is worth like 10 times as much as it normally would be. And then you breach the shields and you're trying to pick away at its armor, and you're damaging it super, super slowly, so your shield burst is more likely to be able to go off. So the Takadaran has a lot of really good synergy with his own shields, whereas this thing doesn't really. This thing's more of a glass cannon-y type thing by comparison, but in spite of saying that, it is actually very, very tough. For civilian research, we're mostly looking at our culture bonus of like the extra speed. That's pretty much all we're getting out of that here. We don't get any sort of like factory bonuses with the ship, so that's not really something that we're looking into. And yeah, that's kind of how that works. Now, let's talk a little bit about builds for this guy. Now, I think that this is one of the ones where it would be nice if there were a couple things going on. It would be nice if it had one extra weapon slot that you could add items into. Maybe just like a dedicated turret slot. Like there was just one thing that said turret, and then you could put a turret into it, and you couldn't put anything else into it. You couldn't put turrets in anywhere else. Like that might be nice. But the other thing I wish this thing could do is actually respec. Because if we're going to go for this thing where we remove all our modules and replace it with different modules, it'd be nice if that could go along with like redistributing our skill points. Because certain things work better in the early game and certain things work better in the later game. For things that work really well in the early game, the modular launch bays with a point of the modular overdrive is ridiculously good. If we compare the Khevarkov to the Anacral Wanderer, the Anacral Wanderer does scale up to 21 strikecraft, whereas the best I can do with this thing seems to be 20. However, at level 1, this thing is capable of having the modular launch bay and the reserve squadron hangar and the base 3 for a total of 15 strikecraft at level 1, whereas the Anacral Wanderer, which is a dedicated carrier, has 6. So you're capable of getting to the point where you're actually a really, really, really scary carrier. And not only that, but you're able to get that one level of modular overdrive, which is functionally increasing your damage per second by like a humongous amount, 33.3% if you consider the uptime at level 1. So you pop like the module here and you take like a level of modular overdrive at level 1, and maybe you swap this one out later. But if you go for like the modular overdrive and a beam during the early game, it's really, really powerful into enemy carriers, capital ships, enemy Titans, or sorry, command ships are a little bit resilient to this, but you can still grind them down because your damage spike for taking modular launch bays is huge. you're talking about a 300 damage per second spike there for fighters, or if you're going all bombers, 240, and that's higher than the phase cannon. Mind you, you're only Pierce 400 with that, but that's still pretty good. So this is actually kind of like a crazy, crazy good ability during the early game, and getting the 50% increased damage off that is something that like is a bit of a pipe dream as far as like other upgrades go. So definitely an early game consideration for that. And since the beams don't need to synergize with anything, they're also capable of dealing a lot of damage. If you're worried more about like other targets, you could go for one of the other turrets. Specifically, actually, it is kind of nice to go for one of those other ones if you're also going to go with tactical assault, because the beams tactical assault bonus is quite bad. So if we're going for this early build, what we would do is we would take the modular overdrive, we would take the modular launch bays, and then we'd think about what we want for our secondary here for tactical assault, because we'd also start leveling that when we get these coming out at level 2. And since we can have these starting at level 2, that would actually be quite strong. In my opinion, if we're going for this route, what we do is we take the missile turrets, and since we're firing these things faster and we're able to sort of get the bonus on our modular launch bays, what we can do is we can saturate the air with missiles, and our like enemy point defenses are going to be firing at both a lot of heavy missiles as well as a lot of strike craft, which gives them a lot more to do. And we're firing them faster, and we're firing these things with like big bonuses here. So I think that combination really, really works, and I think that that's one of the sort of better ways to sort of go about doing things here. Now, the other way that we can sort of do this is we're building it for like scaling into the later game, and we're just starting off like strong, in which case we would go with the modular railguns of the Gauss turrets. But again, I actually think that going for like the modular launch bays in the Gauss turret is better in that instance there, because you're getting such a big spike in terms of what we're doing, and we're going to be getting the modular overdrive anyway. But the Gauss weapon doesn't get as much benefit during the early game. So the modular railgun rather. So I think that it's actually still better to get the modular launch bays in that particular instance. Now, if we are going this route, we could also get that reserve squadron hangar to start off with 15. I think that starting off with 13 squadrons is kind of fine. And what we would probably start adding on here is the core systems armor, giving us those extra armor points, either the ablative armor or the reactive plating as is appropriate, and we could get a combat repair system. We are probably going to need the antimatter engine if we're going for both of these abilities. We're going to be going through antimatter pretty quickly. And that right there is like kind of all of our items already, right? Like that's kind of everything. What we're going to have to do if we sort of want to plan this out for a later game thing, we probably get rid of some of our defenses. We're probably going to get rid of the combat repair system and the core systems armor and just take one of these two. The reason for this is that if we're going for a sort of later game composition, we probably want to go for something that's further in the back, and we'll sort of get into that next build here. But early game, I definitely think that modular launch base is the strongest option with both of these, or with modular overdrive at the very least here. Another build that we could go for is one that is devoted around missiles primarily. In that case, I actually think that we sort of start off with tactical assault, but again, you're going to want modular overdrive as well, so that combination. But modular advanced missiles and missile turrets, very, very powerful, hard-hitting weapons that are capable of dealing a lot of damage to the enemy. And we can sort of just really saturate the air by taking tactical assault and modular overdrive with those weapons there. As far as like nav computer, I would pick nav computer like on one of these guys, but if I was going to go with nav computer on all three of them, it would be if I was doing some sort of weird cheese with like the modular launch bays. The problem is that the modular launch bays and the nav computer, like I could have the 3 Khevarkovs with like completely maxed out levels and completely maxed out fighter capacity, and that's like 60 strike craft squadrons, which is fine, but it's not enough for like a kiting fleet. And what we would be doing is we'd be using the nav computer to like keep these guys out of combat and like run them around in circles, make our opponents chase them around all day, which is kind of useless. I think that if you're going for that kind of strategy, you want to have something like an all-advent carrier fleet that's got access to Chastise, because then you use Chastise to get out of there, and you can do it with the Aria drone hosts, and you can do it with everything else. So I think that like there's a potential thing where you get nav computer on everybody, but I think that realistically, it's not like enough to make an entire fleet out of. I don't think it's a good enough of a gimmick to really rely on. So one ship is going to sacrifice probably tactical assault, in my opinion, and is going to get nav computer instead. But you're going to want modular overdrive in all of them. So anyway, our missile sort of design here, we go with like all missiles. We get tactical assault, we get modular overdrive, and we have the ability to really saturate the area with that. The last sort of build here is the one where you go modular railguns and Gauss turret, and this one is a bit unique. This is a late game build. Again, we're going tactical assault, we're going modular overdrive here, but tactical assault becomes actually the more important ability here. So if we got the third one, we have our third one with tactical assault and nav computer, and the important thing about this is actually the increased range. So with this particular build, we're going modular railguns, we're going Gauss turret, we're going for the targeting array, we're going for the rapid autoloader, and we're going for heavy Gauss slugs. That's 5 weapon systems. Okay, so that's like the entire build. And at that point in time, we also are probably going to have to get the antimatter engine. The thing about this is we're firing from like 16,000 units with our guns, which is such a long distance that like our opponent kind of can't fire at these guys. The rest of our fleet is going to have to be like the tanks for this, because these guys are going to be way in the back, plugging away, slowing down the enemy because they've got the slowdown shots on the railguns, making it so our opponent has a hard time catching up, staggering them with the ion pulse wave so that their movement speed gets interrupted and they have to re-accelerate afterwards. They're going to have a miserable time approaching 3 of these guys from that kind of distance there. And even if we haven't taken any defensive modules, these guys are still pretty tough, so they'll still take a little bit of damage there. What the hope is, though, in that case, is that our opponent has to deal with our frontline stuff a little bit first. In this case, we're going to want stuff like Mars's, which are capable of having their own stun there. We're going to want Dunovs with the slowdowns. We're going to want anything that we can that's going to prevent them from repositioning, while these guys stay in the back, dishing out like really kind of hilarious amounts of damage with all the upgrades they've got on their guns. But again, they're really overpaying in slots for what they're doing here. What we get here is like the bonus shield damage, so enemies are taking like a ton of damage to their shields, and then afterwards they're still taking a lot of damage from the Gauss weapons to everything else there, thanks to the double damage as well as the rapid autoloader. The rapid autoloader is also working well with the modular railguns, and the nice thing about this is also we've got all these light guns attached to us that are going to be firing sort of like at shorter ranges because they're not benefiting from tactical assault. So all of our autocannons are actually going to be opening up on enemy fast ships that are approaching us, that are getting here, that we're not slowing down with our Gauss with our railgun hits. So this is a really, really good combination just for a long-distance siege ship that's capable of putting out good amounts of damage, really focusing on its damage dealing without having to focus on its defensive capabilities, while the rest of your fleet stays up front and brawls. I think that this is a fairly high risk strategy, though, but I think that could potentially be worth it. And I think that as a late game composition sort of idea, this one actually works out really, really well. I do think that in some ways the missile build is probably going to be stronger overall. And the only problem with the missile build is it's a lot less reliable. Being able to point defenses down is difficult, but it is doable. And if you're in a situation where that's happening, then this thing loses out quite badly. By contrast, if you've got like the modular railguns, the Gauss turret, there's really nothing your opponent can do against that. They're just going to take the damage, which I think is quite useful there. Now, I think that this is running into one problem of like you're using the ion pulse wave defensively. If you did get to that level 10 Khevarkov fleet there, I do think that your Gauss weapons and stuff like that, not being able to sort of push into the enemy fleet and just disable them does hurt a little bit, but you're probably going to be okay with just flying yourself a little bit closer so you're within less than maximum range with your weapons if you wanted to go about that. So yeah, that's kind of how I would look at the ship here. You can sort of like swap out items, I think, a little bit with the ship, but it would be nice if there were some things that it could do that would make it so that it could swap things out a little bit more freely. One of the things that I wish is like had that one extra weapon slot that was for the turrets only, but I actually kind of wish that when you use like your ion pulse, like they nerfed the level 2 version a little bit and they made it so instead you could re-scramble, you could de-level abilities and like swap equipment for free. Like you could change this for something else and have that cost nothing. I think that would actually be like kind of interesting for this, because the whole point of it should be that like you could start off with one build and then as the battlefield evolves you can go for a completely different build to suit your needs, right now it can only halfway do that sort of role, which I think is a little bit of a shame here. I think that the ship is just bizarre. I think that it's got some potential. It's got a lot of really fun and interesting builds to it, but I don't think it's particularly strong. And I think that like the thing that does make it really truly strong actually kind of breaks the game. But you're never going to get to use that, so it doesn't really matter that much. Bit of a mess of a ship. Yeah, I think that it's so much the opposite of the Takadaran that it's just kind of laughable. But in any event, though, that's going to be our video for today. Hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.